Hello, this is CS Swati Sharma. This video is going to be helpful for all the students who are aiming to score high in their CS exams. Today, we are going to discuss the SLCA mock exam question paper given by Excel Academy for the December 2021 batch. Along with that, we are going to analyze what are the points and contents that to be included in the answer to score better. The purpose of discussing the question paper is to help the students understand that in addition to having the in-depth knowledge about the entire subject, it is equally important that the students must be able to analyze how to use that knowledge in presenting their answers. In this video, we are going to discuss how a combination of quality content and quality presentation can help students score better in their exams. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments section below. We will reply to them. Also, for any exam related queries or preparation, you can subscribe to our Excel Academy channel. Let's begin the paper analysis. So we are discussing the Securities Law Capital Market mock exam question paper of Excel Academy that we have given in December 2021. So we will see that and analyze the question and answers of what you should include, what are the contents that should be included in your answers and how you should present your answers. The first question is for 5 marks. Right? What is the question? A mutual fund is having 300 units. It has a net asset value of 8.75 at the beginning and 9.45 at the end. The mutual fund has now been given two options. First one is to pay out the dividend and the capital appreciation, and second one is for reinvesting the distribution. So what difference would it make in terms of return available and which option is preferable? So your answer should be divided into two options. First, give them how are you going to write the answer. First, give them basic details that you already know. What is the opening NAV, closing NAV, dividend, capital appreciation, capital distribution, right? And the price paid at the beginning is 300 units into 8.75. That is the amount that is being invested by the unit holder. So this is the basic information that has been available and been provided in the question. Now you have two options. First option is for payout. That is payout of dividend and payout of capital appreciation gains. Second one is reinvestment. So you are supposed to calculate what is the return if you pay out today, or if you reinvest that amount and pay out on a future date, what is the returns going to be. So on the basis of that, whatever answer you get, whatever is the difference between the two options, whichever option has a greater return, that return will be preferable, and that is more that is the answer how you're going to quote it, right? So that is how we are going to answer. First one, first option, returns that are distributed. You're going to calculate what is the amount, what are the returns. So we know that the returns is 23.43%. Then we are going to calculate what are the returns under option 2 if you're going to reinvest the amount. If you're using any formula, you can also quote the formulas, or even if you're directly showing the calculation, that is also sufficient. So you can show the formula also that you are applying. And then what is the returns? It is 24.85. In this it is 23.43. So our conclusion will be that the reinvestment option is better. Why? Because it yields a better return by 1.49%. So you should give a final conclusion as to out of the two, which options is better for the mutual fund. Going to question 1b, this is also for 5 marks. An open offer for acquiring share once made shall not be withdrawn. Comment on the statement. So whenever they are asking you to comment on a statement, they are asking you whether as per your opinion the statement is true or the statement is false. And if it is true or false, what is the reason for stating that it is true or false? So this is what you will include in your answer. You will start your answer by stating whether the statement is true or not. We will state that the given statement is partly true. Why? Because we know that as per the general rule, once an open offer is made, it cannot be withdrawn. Right? That is the general rule that has been laid down under the SC/ST regulations. But there are certain exceptional cases where withdrawal is allowed. Right? So we will say that this statement is partly true because yes, as per the general rule, it cannot be withdrawn. But however, there are certain exceptional cases where it can be withdrawn. So the statement is partly true. Now when we are saying this, we will tell them on what provisions we are saying. We are saying that we are quoting the law which is applicable, that is the SEBI SC/ST regulations. Under SEBI SC/ST regulation, what is the provision, what is the law, that we will mention, and then we will tell them what are the exceptions under which it can be withdrawn. It is a 5 marks answer, so a detailed explanation can be given, right? So the circumstances we will mention one by one under which you can actually withdraw the open offer once made. So then thereafter we will conclude that on the basis of the above mentioned provisions, the statement mentioned is partly true because the SAST regulation itself provides certain circumstances under which open offer can be withdrawn. Moving on to the third question, 1C, it is also for 5 marks, and you will see that there are 5 sub-questions, so you should automatically get to know that each sub-question will carry one particular mark, only it is for 1 mark. So you have to state the reason along with the statement yes or no. So your answer should be maximum 1 or 2 lines. State yes or no, and along with that, for whatever you are saying, what is the reason for you to state that, right? So here they are mainly talking about the definition of employee. The entire question is based on whether a particular employee is eligible for claiming the ESOP, and whenever there any ESOP is issued, it is issued only to the employee. So we should analyze here in this question who is an employee. So we'll definitely talk about, and here in the question they clearly state that in reference, okay, they are asking you to state in reference of the company's share capital and debenture rules of 2014. They are not talking with respect to the SEBI regulations. Here they are talking about the company's rules, that is the share capital and debenture rules. So when you are answering also, you should answer in reference to the rules only. So here we will be quoting rule 2. Under that, what is the definition of an employee? Who are all covered? That is the permanent employee, whether in India or outside, the director of the company, whole-time director, but independent director is completely excluded, and an employee of the subsidiary or holding company will also come under the purview of an employee, and it does not include, okay, they are given exclusions also that you should see. Now on the basis of this definition, we are going to answer the eligibility on the basis of the given situation. The first question, yes, he will be eligible, and second, he will not be eligible. Third one, he will be eligible, and fourth one, no. Fifth one, yes, in case of startup, exemption is given for a period of 10 years where you can include for even the promoters for the purpose of ESOP. Next, 1D. So they've given a situation. There is a company, an Indian Public Limited Company, which is listed on the Bombay Stock Exchange. On Friday, 27th June 19, one of the shareholders of the company, who was already holding 30% of the stake in the company, made a public announcement for open offer for acquisition of 13 crore equity shares, face value 10, constituting 26% of the share capital of the company. The offer price per share according to the takeover regulation is arrived at 500 per share. Explain the provisions with respect to SEBI SAST regulations. So this is the, if you see the question, it seems like it is a practical question where you have to make a lot of calculations. But what is the actual question? They are asking you what is the timeline for depositing the amount in the escrow account in the given case, and explain with the help of relevant provisions what is the amount to be deposited in the escrow account and what is the forms of maintaining the escrow account. So you don't get intimidated or scared by the question by reading the question. Read the sub questions, what they are asking. The entire question is not based on what is the acquisition limit or what is the whether the trigger limit has reached or not. It is a simple question which is based on the provisions of escrow account. They want to know the details about the escrow account, out of which 2 questions are direct. One is what is the timeline and what is the form of maintaining the escrow account. Only one practical question is given, that is calculation. What is the calculation? The calculation is about how much amount is to be deposited in the escrow account, right? So first, we'll take the first sub question, provision relating to escrow account. With respect to 2 things they are asking. First one is with respect to opening of the accounts, and second one is with respect to what is the amount in the instant case that has to be deposited. So we know you can open the escrow account not later than 2 working days after the public statement is made for the open offer. In the given case, they have to do it on or before 12th December 2018. And what is the amount that has to be deposited? It is calculated on the basis given. We know that 25% of the consideration, first 500 crore, 25% of the consideration should be deposited. Over and above 500 crore of consideration, whatever balance is remaining on that, 10% should be added. So in the given case, we know that he is raising 13 crore equity shares, and we know the market price is set up at, the offer price is set up at 500. So that means it amounts, the total consideration will become 6,500. Now when the consideration is 6,500, for first 500 crores, we should calculate 25%. And after that, whatever is remaining, that is 6,500 minus 500, that is remaining 6,000, we will calculate at the rate of 10%. So total 725 crore rupees is required to be deposited into escrow account by this particular company. Then second sub question was, what is the form of maintaining the escrow account? It is a theory based question, which we know that it is either by cash deposit, bank guarantee, or deposit of your securities that are frequently traded. Right? So only one question was a practical question, other questions were direct questions. So don't get scared by reading the question. See the sub questions, what they are asking from you. Right? Moving to question 2A. This is for 4 marks. Right? Coordination of trustee and collective investment management company is essential for success of a collective investment scheme. Explain the context with the help of stating what are the rights available with the trustee. So we have to create or establish a link between the trustee, the collective investment management company, how the scheme has a trustee or has a collective investment management company, and how their coordination is essential to the success of the collective investment scheme. So in the introduction, we will tell them what is a collective investment scheme, right? What is the meaning of a collective investment scheme? What are the provisions under which these particular schemes are regulated? Thereafter, we will bring the appointment of a trustee into picture, that because a collective investment scheme is a trust-based scheme, there is a requirement for appointment of a trustee. What is the duty of the trustee? To take care of the property in the interest of the unit holder, for the benefit of the unit holders. And since it is a trust-based scheme, we have a requirement of appointment of a trustee. So that is how you correlate it. Right? That is how you're linking, you're bringing a flow to your answer. Right? So then we will see how does the collective investment management company come. To give a brief introduction of what is a collective investment management company, what is its role. Then we will go on to state what are the rights of the trustee. Then you state the rights, whatever are laid down as per the regulations, and then give a conclusion that the regulations of 1999 clearly lay down the rights and obligations of the trustee of a collective investment scheme, and for effective management and operation of a collective investment scheme, it is absolutely necessary that there is a coordination and cooperation among the investment company, collective investment management company, and the trustee. So by using the language that has been given in the question, you can use that in your answer. That way you are communicating to the evaluator that you have answered, you have addressed every point that has been quoted in your question. Moving to the next question, explain the modes of payment for shareholders of target company in case by the acquirer under the SAST regulations. So they are asking you for modes of payment, how the payment will be made. So that those modes, as per regulation 9 of SEBI SAST regulation, mention what are the provisions. Okay, we know the provisions, we have studied it in detail. Mention those provisions and give a conclusion that whenever payment is required to be made, it has to be made as per the regulation 9. Next. LODR regulation as amended imposes an obligation on every listed company to constitute a nomination remuneration committee and the risk management committee. Briefly explain the constitution and the role of these committees. So your answer should be divided into 2 parts. First part should talk about the nomination and remuneration committee. Second should talk about the risk management committee. Right? Under that you will have subheadings. One is about the constitution. Next will be about role of the committee. Similarly, here we will talk about the constitution and as well as of the role of the committee. So structure your answer. Divide it into 2 parts. First about the nomination remuneration, second one about the risk management committee, and in each case what is the constitution and what is the role of the committee. State the regulations that are applicable, the LODR regulations, right? First we will talk about the constitution of the nomination remuneration committee, right? And then we will talk about the role. Then coming to risk management committee, we know that recently there has been an amendment to the provisions that has been brought by the SEBI LODR second amendment regulations of 2000 and 2021, right? So you will state that also as per the latest amendment. This will give a evaluator an idea that you are updated with the latest provisions, that you know all the amendments that have been brought into force. So quote that the provisions relating to risk management committee have been recently amended, and as per the amendment, what is the constitution of the committee and what is the role and responsibility of the committee. Next, SEBI insider trading regulations. We have to take these regulations into consideration and answer what is an unpublished price sensitive information, and state the reasons whether the following information is price sensitive or not. So this question is for 4 marks. So your each sub question will be for 2 marks and 2 marks. So here there are 2 more sub questions that will be for 1 mark and 1 mark. So keep it a maximum to 1 or 2 line answer. Right? So first, what is unpublished price sensitive information? You have to give the definition of what is unpublished price sensitive information. So state the provisions as per the insider trading regulations and give a meaning. Then give the list of all the information that is considered to be unpublished price sensitive information. Then we'll go ahead to second sub question. In that they have said that RBI has increased its statutory liquidity ratio by 15 basis points. Whether it is a unpublished price sensitive information, the answer is no. Justify your reason. Similarly, companies are increasing authorized capital. In this case, yes, it is a unpublished price sensitive information. It will impact the value of the shares. It comes under the list that has been enumerated under the provisions. Therefore, it is considered as unpublished price sensitive information. Similarly, Young India is a company incorporated under the Companies Act. It has listed on the NSE on 1st January 2017. The promoters of the company are now exploring the possibility of voluntary delisting on 2019. So they have established in 2017. They have been listed on 2017, and in 2019 they are wanting to delist. Right? This is the fact that they are given. Now, under SEBI delisting regulations of 2009, by providing an exit opportunity to all the public shareholders, by giving them an exit opportunity, they want to delist the company by voluntary means. So, assume you are the legal advisor of the company and accordingly answer the question whether the company is eligible for voluntary delisting and what are the circumstances under which delisting cannot be permitted. Right? So, that these are the 2 questions. It is a direct question that is to be answered. Right? So we will give them a brief introduction of what is delisting, right? And there are 2 modes. One is voluntary and one is by the stock exchanges in case there is contravention of the provisions. So first one, they have asked you about the eligibility. We know that you can be eligible only after the period of 3 years has elapsed since you are listed. So in this case, the company was listed on 2017. In 2019, 3 years period has not elapsed. Therefore, he is not eligible for voluntary delisting. Second question, what are the conditions under which the equity shares cannot be delisted? So mention the points pursuant to buyback, pursuant to preferential allotment, right? Unless a 3 years period has been elapsed, or any instrument which are convertible, which are still pending, even in that case, you are not allowed to delist your securities. So mention the provisions. Next question, 2A. So this is also for 4 marks. What does the provision say? A company is planning for the IPO of equity share. It has decided for differential pricing for retail individual investors, for qualified institutional buyers, and for non-institutional investors. For all of them, they want to issue the shares in the IPO at what? At different rates. Whether it is allowed or not, right? What is the question? They are saying that examine the validity of the proposal of the company in the light of SEBI regulations, and what will be your answer if the company is proposing 280 rupees to anchor investors in case of a book building issue. So here we are not talking about the percentage of allotment which is to be given to the RRR or QIBs under these regulations. What are we talking? We are completely talking only related to the price at which the shares can be issued to different categories of investors, whether different pricing is allowed. So we will mainly talk about the conditions on which you can issue equity shares at differential pricing for different category of investors. What are the regulations? Regulation 30 is applicable. We will mention the regulation. And second part of the question was, if you are offering to an anchor investor at the rate of 280 rupees, is it allowed or is it not allowed? So we will justify that answer by quoting regulation 30. What are the matters that cannot be considered as complaints under the scores? Specify the details. So they have simply given what is scores. So it is important for you to clearly mention what is scores. So in the introduction say that scores is a SEBI complaint redressal system. We know that that system has been set up to redress the grievance of the investors, to help the investors lodge their complaints against two people. One is the listed companies or any SEBI registered intermediaries. And we also know that only after they have finished the first step, that is approaching the company and the intermediary, when they don't get any kind of response, then they can approach the courts, right, for redressing their grievance. So we have given a brief introduction about what is courts. Then we will go on to the main concept, that is what are the matters that cannot be considered by courts, that cannot be accepted as a complaint by courts. Okay, give them the details which we have already studied, and what are the grounds on which the application will not be taken into consideration. Here a company secretary of Sunglow Limited, which being a listed entity on the stock exchange after an IPO has made by the company. The MD desires to know about the quarterly compliance requirements of the listing agreement. Prepare a list of quarterly compliance as per the listing regulations. So they have clearly only asked you to quote what are the quarterly requirements or compliance requirements of a company that is a listed entity as per the listing agreement. So whenever they are asking you for any advice, please give it in the form of a letter, right? It is to the managing director of the company. Use the name or names that are given in the question, that will give an added advantage, right? Then give a subject. What is it? Quarterly compliance requirements under the listing agreement. Respected sir, the following are the requirements. State what are the requirements. Not necessary that you have to give these requirements in the tabular format. Whatever is comfortable for you, whatever is easy for you, you can use that mode for quoting these compliance requirements. Once you quote all the requirements as laid down under the listing agreement, conclude your answer, conclude the letter format, that is thank you, signed regards, Company Secretary of Sunglow Limited. So wherever names are given in the question, try to use that in the answers. Right, that will give a personalized attention to each question. The evaluator will think that you have given minute attention to all the points that have been quoted in the question. Right. Next, increase in voting right in a target company by any shareholder pursuant to buyback is exempted from an obligation to make an open offer subject to certain conditions. You are required to enumerate these conditions. Right. So we are required to state the conditions in which even after buyback, if your voting rights have increased as per the threshold limit or the triggering offer, even then you will be exempted from making an open offer. For that, what are the conditions, right? So we are talking about the conditions to be fulfilled for claiming the exemptions from making an open offer by if your voting rights have increased because of buyback of shares. So we'll quote the what are the provisions, that is regulation 10 of which regulations? SAST regulations. What are the conditions that you have to be fulfilling? Those conditions, mention the conditions and then conclude your answer, right? Next, the holding of securities in dematerialized form is not mandatory. Explain the provisions with the help of a Depositories Act, right? So you have to state whether the statement is true or false, right? So we will justify our answer by stating the provisions of the Depositories Act. So we know that the provisions of the Depositories Act relating to dematerialization of shares or holding shares in the demat form is laid down under the Depositories Act. We will tell them what is dematerialization, and we will tell them that the option is given to the investor whether they want to hold the security in demat form or in the physical form. It is not mandatory for them to hold it in the demat form, but we should also clearly mention in this answer only that whenever there is a trading of shares on the stock exchange, it has to be in the demat form, right? Whenever you are issuing fresh securities, you should be in demat form. Once the securities are issued to the shareholder, then option will be given to him whether he wants to trade, then he has to keep it in demat form. But if he is going to keep it long term, he does not want to trade in those securities, in that case he will have an option of keeping it in the physical form. But the day when he thinks that he wants to trade in it, he has to mandatorily reconvert those physical share certificate into the demat form. So that is what we are going to include in answer by stating the provisions of the Depositories Act of 1996 and then give a statement that the statement is true because trading of securities requires that it should be in the demat form. But if the investor wishes to hold the security, he does not wish to trade in securities, he definitely has an option to hold the shares in the physical form. Next, there is a listed company. The promoter group is holding 47%. It proposes to transfer 2% of the shares held by one promoter group to the another group. The target company sought your advice as a practicing company secretary on applicability of exemption for making a compulsory open offer. So here they are talking about exemptions from an obligation to make an open offer. what are the exemptions? We know that there are two. One is automatic and one is exemption by SEBI. Here, if automatically you fall under the conditions, you don't have to take prior permission. You will get the applicability. But there are certain cases where you have to make an application to SEBI, and if your application is valid, they will allow you the exemption. So in our case, what is the applicability? It is Regulation 10, that is the automatic exemption, because there is inter-se transfer of shares between the promoters. Right? In that case, there will be an exemption from making an open offer. So in this case, there is no requirement, and the the promoters will be exempted from making an open offer. Now, a Neono Limited, an unlisted company, is in the process of expanding its business. For expansion, it needs 200 crores. For raising the 200 crores, now the company is thinking that it will make an IPO through a book building mechanism. It has fixed a price band of 500 to 600 rupees, referring to the provisions of the ICDR regulations. Advise the company on what should be the minimum application value, what should be the minimum number of equity shares in one particular application, what will be the minimum sum payable on one application, and what should be the minimum time period for which the open offer should be open. The period for the IPO should be open. What is the duration of the offer that should be open? So in this, two questions are practical based and one question is theory. Right? So we will divide our answer also into sub-question wise. First one is calculation of application and minimum application value. We will quote what are the regulations applicable on which we are going to make our calculation. Then sub-question 2 we will answer. Sub-question 2, what is the period for subscription that should be kept open for? It should be kept open for at least a period of 3 working days, but not more than 10 working days. Right? And in case there is a revision of price band, that also you can quote for a minimum period of 3 working days. Right. Next, Sukriti Limited, an unlisted company, has decided to bring an IPO and has filed a draft offer document, but the company is not able to interpret a particular circular. Therefore, the managing director wants to take an informal guidance from SEBI under the guidance scheme. Ramesh, the director, is of the view that since the company is not yet listed on the stock exchange, the company cannot seek any kind of informal guidance from SEBI. Being the company secretary, discuss who is eligible for informal guidance and whether in the instant case the company can apply for guidance, and what are the matters on which the guidance cannot be sought. So we will first divide our answers into 2 points. First one is eligibility criteria, and second one is the matters on which you cannot seek guidance. So what is the eligibility criteria? We will mention that 5 criteria, and then we will give whether in the instant case this particular company is eligible. Yes, the company is eligible. Why? Because even the company which intends to be going to listing its securities in the future, because in this instant case draft offer document has already been filed, so there is an intention of the company to make an IPO. That is clearly stated. It is not yet listed, but it intends to get listed in a future date. So in that case, even such companies have the permission to apply for seeking any kind of informal guidance from SEBI. So they are eligible for seeking informal guidance. And then second sub question was matters on which informal guidance cannot be sought. Right? Those points should be mentioned. In hypothetical situations you cannot, right, where you have not completely disclosed what are the factual situations, you have not given the complete details. In that case, they will not be able to give you the guidance. In which you do not have direct or proximate interest, okay, just for the or just as a third party you are asking, they will not be eligible. Where legal provisions are not cited, where there is no action plan has already been issued once you have already applied, or for the guidance again for the same matter you cannot, right? Those in which investigation, inquiry or other enforcement actions have already been initiated, those where the cases are pending before any kind of tribunal or the courts, or any cases which are in reference to any other department, in that case you will not, when there is a concern with respect to any policy, the department will not respond to your application that you have filed for seeking the informal guidance. Next, question 4. This is for 8 marks. It is a long question, right? So what are they asking? They're giving you the facts of the case, and they're asking you how much time should elapse before approaching an ombudsman for a written representation, state the grounds and procedure for filing complaint before ombudsman, and whether a legal practitioner can be filed to fight a case or to present your case before an ombudsman. So this entire is theory based question on the ombudsman regulations, right? So because it is a 8-mark question, we have to tell them in brief who is an ombudsman, who is appointed, what are the provisions under which we have appointed or established the ombudsman, right? What are the objectives? What is the need for establishment of an ombudsman? After that, we will talk about what is the timeline to file a representation, that is within a period of 1 month. Then we will go to the second sub question, what are the grounds and procedure. So in that also there are two sub question. A, we will talk about the grounds on which you can file a application before the ombudsman, and B is what is the procedure of filing a complaint before the ombudsman, right? So this is a in detailed answer because it is a 8-mark question, so you cannot skip anything. Then third question is whether you can appoint a legal practitioner to appear on your behalf before the ombudsman. Yes, you can approach, and that is how you are going to conclude your answer. And therefore, it is a 8-mark question. Give a valid conclusion that all the provisions relating to the ombudsman are laid down under the SEBI Ombudsman Regulation of 2003, which clearly lays down all the provisions regarding establishment of the ombudsman, powers of and the functions of the ombudsman, what is the procedure for redressal, implementation of the above. All these provisions are clearly laid down under the Ombudsman Regulations of 2003, right? Then they have given certain financial data of Recyclable Products Limited. What is the authorized capital, paid up capital and free reserves. The company is now also having convertible debentures of 150 crores which are due for conversion in 2021. But the company proposes to issue bonus share in the ratio 1:1 after the conversion of debentures. So after the conversion of debentures, they want to issue bonus share in the ratio 1:1. You being the company secretary, advised by following what are the SEBI regulations. So we will quote to them regulation 293 to 295 of the ICDR regulations, which talks about issue of bonus shares. So first we should see whether they are fulfilling the conditions which are to be fulfilled for issuing of bonus shares. So state the conditions. What are the conditions? That it should be permitted by the Articles of Association, right? It should be paid out only out of certain reserves, that there is no default in the payment of interest or principal, that there is no default in the payment of any amount that is due to the employees under either the gratuity, provident or bonus. There is, if there is any partly paid up share, that should be made fully paid up when you are issuing or allotting the bonus shares, and any other promoters is not a fugitive economic offender. Only if these conditions are fulfilled, the company will be eligible for issuing bonus shares. Now we know that the company has proposed to issue the bonus share after the conversion of the convertible into equity shares. So now in the instant case, on the basis of the details, we know paid up capital is 300 crores. The paid up capital after conversion of debentures will become 450 crores because 150 crores they had convertible debentures. So that we will add, it will become 450 crores. What is the proposed bonus issue? For 1:1. For every one share, one more share they are going to issue. So your post bonus issue capital will be 900 crores, right? Because it is already 450 crores. Initially it was 300, then you converted your debentures into equity shares, it became 450. Now after 450, for every one share you are giving bonus shares, so that becomes 900, right? So you have 900 crore rupees as your post-issue capital, but your authorized capital is only 700 rupees. Therefore, it is important that if the company wants to make a bonus issue, so the company should increase its authorized capital by 200 crore rupees more to be eligible to be issuing the bonus shares. Now, what is the mode of payment? We know it should be made out of reserves and surplus. Next, the other conditions that are to be followed, you can give a brief description of other conditions because since it is a 8-mark question. Next, part B, what do you mean by research analyst? Elucidate the net worth requirements and role and responsibility of a portfolio manager, right? So it is very important to read the question by just seeing what is the question. Research analyst should not assume that they are asking the net worth requirement and role and responsibility of a research analyst. So there are two different questions here. One question is based on research analyst and second question is based on portfolio managers, right? So first you will talk about who is a research analyst because they have just asked you about who is a research analyst. They have not asked you in detail. They have just asked you who is a research analyst. And second, with respect to portfolio manager, they are asking you the net worth requirements and role and responsibility. So first and foremost, in all these, whenever you get a question on any of these intermediaries, it is very important for you to quote what are the regulations under which they are governed. Okay, so first we will state that the research analysts are governed under the SEBI Research Analyst Regulations of 14. As per the definition, what is the meaning of a research analyst, what are their roles. Okay, we will mention that. Next, our second question was about the portfolio manager. Again, we will quote the regulations, that is the SEBI Portfolio Manager Regulations of 2020. Net worth requirements, what is the net worth requirement, and what are the roles and responsibilities of the portfolio manager. That is how we are going to frame our answer, divided into two parts. First one is about the research analyst, and the second part is about the portfolio manager. Here we just have to give a brief meaning of who is this person, and in this case we have to give a detailed answer about what is the net worth requirement and what is the role and responsibility of the portfolio manager. But first and foremost, what you have to quote is the governing provisions. Right? What are the regulations under which these provisions or these particular intermediaries are governed under? Next, Z is holding equity shares in PQR Limited, and he has made a request for differential right voting shares. Enumerate the conditions to be satisfied for issuing equity shares with differential right. So they want you to lay down. It seems like a practical question, but it is a direct theory question where they are asking you what are the conditions for issuing equity share with differential right as to voting. So we will quote the provisions of the Companies Act where permission is given to issue the shares with differential voting rights, but there are certain conditions that are to be fulfilled. We have studied these conditions, mentioned these conditions on the fulfillment of which the company will get a permission to issue the shares with differential right as to voting. Next, this is a practical problem where you have to calculate whether there is a profit or there is a loss. Right? So they've given that a person has purchased 3 months call option and 3 months put option. What is the premium and what is the exercise price? They've given you the details. They've given you the size of the purchase. They are saying one lot has 100 shares. They are saying that the current market price is 500, and also if the market price after 3 months on the date of execution will be 500 or 350. So they've given you two options. So you should structure your answer in a way that option 1, what happens when the market price is 500, what happens to the call option, and what happens to the put option. Whether there is a loss or whether there is a profit, whether there is a loss or whether there is a profit, and then conclusion whether there is a net loss or net profit. And then you will go on to the second option, that is if your market price is 350 rupees, in that case what happens to your call option, whether you will make a profit or a loss in that particular option if your market price is at 350, what happens to the put option, and ultimately after that what is your net loss or net profit. This is how you are going to structure your answer. Right? First and foremost is you should write down the given data in your answer so that you don't have to time and again go and read the sentence wise. So if you are writing this like this premium 20, strike price 525, it will be easier to capture the information while you are solving the problem. Rather than going and reading the entire statement or sentence again from the question, it is easier to capture it if you write it in this form in the answer paper. Right? Write down all the data that has been given to you in the question and then go ahead with calculation. Option 1, when the market price is 500, what happens to the call option? Because it will not be exercised because the market price is lower than the strike price, we will definitely go and purchase it from the market and we will not exercise the option, but the premium has been paid by 20 rupees premium on 100 shares, so 2000 rupees is the loss in this particular case. Then in put option, again the option will not be exercised as market price is higher than the strike price, and whenever we are selling something we will sell it at a higher value, and here the market price is higher, so we will not exercise the option. But however, even in this case we have paid a premium of 10 rupees on 100 shares, so 1000. So in both the cases there is a loss. In case 1 it is 2000, in case 2 it is 1000. So total loss is 3000 rupees when the market price is 500. When we go to calculating the second option, that is when the market price is at 350 rupees, the option will not be exercised, that is the call option will not be exercised as the market price is lower than the strike price, but we have paid a premium, so that will be a loss. Next, put option, the option will be exercised. Why? Because there is a gain. What gain? Is rupees 9000. So if you would have gone to the market, you would have got 350 rupees, but as per your option it is at 450, that is the strike price that has been agreed at. So this is the gain that you have made on 100 shares, that is 9000, but we have still paid a premium of 1000 rupees, so that is a gain of 8000 rupees. But in the previous On the call option, we have suffered a loss of 2000. So our net gain will be 8000 minus 2000, that is 6000 rupees. Moving to the last question, question 6 or 6A. Right, you have an option. These are all 3 marks questions. So keep it short, keep it limited, keep it to the point. Right? Who are net worth individuals? Give a meaning of them, and what is the basis of classification? On the basis of the limits that have been set, how will you classify a person as a high net worth individual? Next, investment advisors. We will say who is an investment advisor, what are the regulations under which they are governed, what are the net worth requirements, and what are the primary roles and responsibilities. Since it is a 3-mark question, you don't have to give all the roles and responsibilities that are entrusted on the investment advisors. Only the primary roles and responsibilities can be quoted. That is sufficient for a 3-mark answer. I have just quoted all the roles and responsibilities so that you can go through and revise. Next question is about optionally convertible debentures. Okay, you just have to go what are the provisions that they are governed, what is the meaning of convertible security, what is the meaning of optionally convertible securities and debentures. That is how you are going to answer, and they are called hybrid because it has a combination of both. Next, custodian. Similarly, we will tell who is a custodian of securities, what are the services that they are provide, what are the regulations under which they are governed, what is the net worth requirement, and what are the general roles and obligations. So this is also only the primary role and responsibility of the custodian. Right? Next, private equity. Similarly, what is private equity? Where does it come under? What is the category under which it comes? And what are the provisions of law? If you quote that, that is sufficient for 3 marks answer. Right? Next, last question. What is a futures contract? And they're given a practical question where Aditya buys 500 shares of XYZ Limited at 210 per share, and in to hedge his position, he has sold 300 futures at the rate of 195 each. Now, due to the fall in the shares and future price by 5% and 3%, so he closes the position by counter transaction. Counter transaction means opposite. So if you have sold today, you will buy, and if you have bought today, you will sell. So that is known as counter transaction. So part A is a theory based question. What is a future contract? You can give the theory, what is the meaning, what is the short position, what is the long position. Second one is about the calculation about profit and loss, because he is also undertaken a counter transaction. So we will give the computation, right? Whether there is a profit or there is a loss. So we will say there is a net loss. Then what is meant by greenshoe option? Explain the procedure of greenshoe option. This is entirely theory based, right? We have studied the concept of greenshoe option in detail. You can mention, okay, what is the procedure, what is the concept of greenshoe option, why this greenshoe option concept was introduced, and then you will state the procedure of greenshoe option. You can give it in the tabular format. It is easy to understand. Also give certain explanation. Right? What is the limits? What is the percentage limits? All that can be given in writing below. You can put a note and give all the additional points which cannot be included in the tabular format below by the way of a note. Next, the registrar to an issuer or a share transfer agent constitute an important part of the intermediaries in the market. List out the pre-issue and post-issue work taken by them. So it is entirely based on the regulations, that is the SEBI registrar to an issue and share transfer agent regulations of 93. So quote these regulations, and on that what is the work or activities that are entrusted upon them. We will divide it into 2 parts because they have asked you to quote both pre-issue and post-issue. So we will talk about pre-issue work. You will list all the pre-issue work, and then we will talk about the post-issue work of the registrar and the share transfer agent and complete the answer. In the conclusion, you will say that the roles and responsibilities vested on the registrar to an issue and share transfer agent are an important categories of intermediaries in the securities market. Therefore, they are essential for efficient functioning of the market. Because of the pre-work and the post-work that we have mentioned above, it is very important for, these works are very important for the functioning of a securities market. Therefore, though their role in the securities market is of great importance. That is how we are going to conclude our answer. So this brings us to the end of this question paper analysis. If you have any doubts, you can leave them in the comment section below. We will reply to them. And for more such videos, you can subscribe to our Excel Academy channel. And for any other services related to the CS course, you can contact us on the WhatsApp number that is given above. And you can also have a register on our website. That is a free sign up for checking the courses that are being offered. And for any other support, you can always get back to us or get in touch with us on the WhatsApp number. Thank you.